like to thank them for the excellent event they staged, where I raised over £450 for gifts. And just finally, just to remind all those councillors and employees of the council present this evening, it is possible to make a small monthly donation to gift via payroll giving. As little as £2 per month could mean over £40,000 going to Thurrock charities and good causes. So I'd appreciate if you all bear that in mind. So thank you very much, and I now move over to the Leader of the Council. Do you have an announcement?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As you'd expect, a few after the summer break. Pleased to announce that both Grays and Tilbury are to benefit from the government's funding to bring improvements to infrastructure, drive economic growth and increase opportunities for both Grays and Tilbury. Both towns will receive a share of the government's £3.6 billion new towns funding, with each in line to get up to £25 million. Grays has also been named as one of the additional 50 towns successful in the first round of bids for the government's Future High Street Fund. It means we will receive additional funding to develop detailed business plans to bid for a share of the £1 billion government funding, which can be used to invest in new infrastructure and revitalise the Grays High Street, attracting businesses, shoppers and homes to the town. This is all on top of the ambitious plans Thurrock Council have already announced at Grays Town Centre, stretching from the Thames side to the very heart of the town itself. With £200 million worth of investment already secured, including underpass at Grays Station, which has received £11 million funding from the government already through CELEP and the Local Growth Fund. In addition, there is a massive amount of investment set to transform the private areas such as the estate and indeed the shopping mall with the new owners, New River. Equally, I'm pleased to announce some antisocial behaviour successes. Some of this will come on to in more depth with my questions later on this evening. We've enjoyed a number of successes tackling antisocial behaviour across the borough. Pleased to tell you that we've secured a temporary injunction preventing anyone from setting up unauthorised encampments on specific areas of both public and private land in Thurrock. It means that anyone who attempts to set up an illegal encampment faces the prospect of immediate arrest, and it will give the council and police extra tools to move these encampments on within just a few hours rather than a few days. The interim injunction will be in place for a couple of months before we're heard for the final injunction. This has been a long time coming. I'd like to thank all the officers and the elected members that have supplied and helped build the body of evidence to help us get so far, indeed much further than London Borough of Bexley, who had their interim injunction quite severely curtailed. We've had none of that. A joint campaign between Essex Police and our environmental enforcement officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and activities linked to discarding nitrous oxide canisters in our car parks in Thurrock has proven to be a real success. In the first few weeks of this operation, we have seen 20 fixed penalty notices issued for offences such as littering, fly posting and antisocial behaviour. 26 community protection warnings issued to people involved in antisocial behaviour in Grays, Chapel 100 and Tilbury. Secured 10 criminal behaviour orders. A 10-year criminal behaviour order against a dog owner who made the lives of his neighbours a complete misery. We've also seized another property back that was being used as a drug den and the tenant evicted so it can be brought back into use for a more deserving family. I can attest to these night operations and weekend operations working very well. I myself have been out with them once so far. I also understand Councillor Allen has attended with them. And it's really good to see residents seeing action taken and actually saying, wow, we don't expect to see you out this late at night, this is brilliant. And equally those that are caught saying, oh, we didn't expect you to be out this late at night, damn. Moving on to our awards, we've got the APSE award for the Council's Give a Gift campaign. It won the Best Community and Neighbourhood Initiative at the Association for Public Service Excellence last Thursday. As we know, Give a Gift is hosted by the council. It's a campaign that collects presents in the run-up to Christmas for those children in Thurrock that are in more need than others. And some of those may not receive any Christmas presents at all otherwise. Last year, gifts were donated for more than 2,400 children. This award isn't just for the council at all. It's also for the thousands of residents that are generous in the run-up to Christmas. Not just residents of Thurrock, but actually residents from all over that give these gifts. Give a Gift will be returning to Lakeside for the 4th year this year, For more information about this will be announced towards the end of October. I'm going to take this opportunity to thank not only those that do give, but also all the sponsors that make this happen. It's not something that just magics itself up. There's an awful lot of money that goes in to make it happen, but equally there's an awful lot of volunteers, both elected members, members of staff, and indeed residents and shop owners of Lakeside that help out to collect the presents. It really does bring the whole community together. Glad to announce, I'm sure many of us know, Fran Lederer it's been announced that she is now the Chief Social Worker for England in a joint role with Mark Harvey from Hertfordshire Council. This is a huge recognition for Fran's talents and expertise, and I'm sure we'd all like to say a good thanks and a well done to her, not only for the service here, but the service she will be giving to social workers across the country. My clinic fit and other ASB updates for the whole year. Since April 2019, 1,084 potholes were filled, more than 99% within agreed timeframes, 647 fly tips cleared, 1,299 tonnes of waste cleared from our streets, 2,187 fixed penalty notices have been issued for offences such as littering, dropping cigarette butts, various forms of antisocial behaviour, 187 fixed penalty notices for fly tipping, as well as a number of vehicles seized for this offence, as well as 54 prosecutions for those who failed to pay their fixed penalty notices that have been taken to court and received heavy fines. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We now move on to item 6, questions from members of the public. No public questions were received within the deadline. Item 7, petition from members of the public and councillors. Please be advised that in accordance with the council's petition scheme, 2 notices of petition have been received this evening. I'd have asked that Democratic Services collect the petition after it has been presented. Councillor Byrne, would you please present your petition in regard of residents asking for a more resident-friendly parking permit scheme in SS17 Stanford-le Hope? You have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, a petition, but it's also a plea for help to say, please stop harming SS17. You sold our car park. You bulldoze our station and then walk away and leave it. The A13 widening project, they're stopping urgent repair work on the Manorway, and now you're putting parking permits. That's instantly stopped our community from being a community. The petition is in the hope that you will finally listen to residents' questions over the introduction of parking permits in Stanford-le Hope. This was put through a very flawed consultation where only 59 residents wanted parking permits out of a population of well over 25,000. The second consultation was also taken into account and never actually happened. It's totally scandalous. This has had a devastating effect on SS17. Take Hardy Park, for example. The council put in tens of thousands of pounds into this amazing project. Then what do? They put in parking restrictions to stop residents using it. You really couldn't make this stuff up. Shop owners have seen a massive downturn in business. Commuters have seen their parking fees doubled. Charities and fundraising events have been seriously affected. One minister has claimed it's multi-faith discrimination. I certainly have a very strong case for ward discrimination. Our over 70s book club has closed. The same story with the All Mums Together Club. Things like the Macmillan Coffee Morning are not happening in Stanford this year. The residents demand a full review and that their committee is taken seriously and no longer labelled as just members of the public wanting to attend a meeting. All they ask for is a more friendly scheme that takes into account the whole of SS17 and not just a cherry-picked ward. It's taken many years of hard work to achieve what's happened in SS17, and due to a total lack of due diligence, it's harming our very strong and united community. It's proving to be just a resident stealth tax and a council cash cow. It really is permit gate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. The next petition, Councillor Redsill, would you please present a petition in regard of the residents' petition from residents in the Heathview Gardens while requesting road hardening for parking? You have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The undersigned asked the council to consider replacing the grassed area in Heathview Gardens with hard standing for parking. It is forcing areas to park on the corners of Heathview Gardens and obstructing the views of cars pulling out onto Heathview Road. It's quite a big area of grassed area, and there's only about 15 to 20 houses in that little cul-de-sac. So all we're asking is that it just gives them more room to park. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We now move on to item 8, update report in respect of those petitions presented at full council and council offices. This report can be found on page 33 to 36 of the agenda and is for information on the status of petitions handed in at council meetings and council offices. Now move on to item 9, appointments to committees and outside bodies, statutory and other panels. Councillor Gledhill, do you wish to make any changes to the appointments previously made?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to add Councillor Johnson as a substitute member on General Services Committee, please.
Thank you, Councillor Gledhill. Councillor Pothcary. Councillor Spillman. Sorry. Are all members in approval of the change, the addition? Thank you. Item 10, to receive reports from Cabinet members. There is one Cabinet member report on the agenda this evening. The time allowed for this report is 15 minutes. I will take one question from each member and will come back to those members who may wish to ask any additional questions if time allows. Please can I remind members to be as brief as possible in their question and answers to ensure that we cover as many of the questions submitted. The report of Councillor Johnson, the Cabinet Member of Housing, can be found on pages 37 to 50 of the agenda. Councillor Johnson, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is the second presentation of the housing portfolio to the Chamber, and I'm very happy to have the chance to speak about the key challenges, opportunities we face and outline the achievements made during the financial year 2018-19. Despite overall satisfaction with housing services at the start of 2018-19 being slightly below target, we now see overall satisfaction levels significantly improve in the current year, with a year-to-date rate of 74.3% at the end of August, which is in no small part due to our increased level of engagement with our tenants, including the first and what will now be annual tenants conference held in March this year. I'm also pleased to report that satisfaction with transforming homes, which is an integral part of our service, remained high at 87.5%, which included the successful mobilisation of 2 new contractors for the programme, and the level continues to improve in the current year. Repairs satisfaction levels rose to 91.9% in 18-19, with January 19 recording the single highest monthly level to date, with a recording of 95.2%. 2018-19 saw the addition to the scorecard of tenant satisfaction with quality of their home, caretaking services and their estate officers, and I'm pleased to report that all are showing improvements in their first year's reporting. Complaints are always an area that, despite the authority not wishing to receive any, is actually an area that can help us improve, and judging by the consistent reduction in the numbers received, I believe this administration is indeed listening, learning and above all doing something about it. These numbers are quite significant. 16-17, Thurrock received 894 complaints. In 17-18, the service received 656, and last year, 2018-19, we received 570 complaints. This strong performance has, I'm pleased to report, continued, as the service received only 161 complaints between April and August 2019. Another area that shows improvement is the active garage project, a highlight of which is a large increase in new garage lettings between April and August 2019 compared to the same period in the previous year. As the report clearly shows, the new build programme will deliver 117 new council homes for rent, comprising of low-rise flats, maisonettes and bungalows, within a budget of £32.53 million, as agreed within the HRA Capital Programme, with rents set at 70% of local market and subject to a local housing allowance cap. Looking forward, within the £6.6 billion regeneration programme of the growth of Thurrock, the Council has agreed to targets of a further 500 housing units within 5 to 10 years and TRL to produce 1,000 homes between 2018 and 2023. To achieve this, the Council must be ready with an agreed process of investigation in clarifying the potential use of sites, such as garage sites, including access, as well as potential unit numbers. And I am pleased to announce that I have agreed to a paper being brought to Cabinet via Housing ONS, and I will be asking the Chair of Housing ONS if she will kindly add an extra meeting in November, which first identifies a process of identification of sites, and once agreed by Cabinet, a further report noting the preferred sites will go through the same process, enabling us to have a robust and transparent site development process properly embedded in our procedures and processes sooner rather than later. The Council undertook a review of its housing allocations policy last year to reflect local changes, with consultation activity involving the Council's tenants and other residents of Thurrock, as well as stakeholders, with the changes in policy implemented in April 2019, resulted in the local connection qualification criteria being strengthened, the financial qualification criteria to more reflect the cost of housing markets in Thurrock, and to ensure all our allocations of policy is above all needs-based. The Homelessness Reduction Act 2017 was implemented in April 2018 and represented a significant change to the rights of homeless persons in England. Following the first year of implementation, the Council received a total of 1,605 applications, representing a 15% increase. So we understand that much more needs to be done, including the addition of our own temporary accommodation, to achieve early intervention, which should ensure we have more of a chance in preventing homelessness rather than simply dealing with homeless persons. Mr. Mayor, I believe my report demonstrates our commitment to maintain and improve the housing portfolio. I welcome any questions from colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor. We'd normally move to Councillor Warren as Chair of the Housing Over and Scrutiny Committee, but she's absent this evening. Has the Vice Chair been given a report? No. Okay. We then move on to Councillor Pothecary. Do you wish to speak?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. Thank you to Councillor Johnson for your report. You did mention complaints in your report, in your address to us, and I just wanted to raise the fact that looking at some of the complaints data that's actually been produced, the percentage of stage 1 complaints upheld has gone up across housing repairs, housing solutions, estate services and transforming homes. All of those areas also appear in the top 10 complaints areas for 2018 and 2019 from across the council, which is a little bit concerning that they form such a huge bulk of the top 10 complaint areas. Obviously, with the number of stage 1 complaints being upheld, that's not a direction of travel that we would like to see, or I'm sure no one in here would like us to see that. It suggests that we're not getting things right as frequently as we should be first time without people having to complain about it. Could you just reassure the Chamber that this time next year the number of complaints received and upheld will see significant improvement, and detail the steps that you think it will take to get us there?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. I'd love a crystal ball and be able to tell you that. As I said in there, no one wants to receive complaints, even one's too many. But, you know, that they are going to happen. It's a very big organisation. We have a lot of people working for us, lots of different people doing different jobs. It's something that I'm not happy with, but it's something I know we're working on. And what I am happy with is the fact that the officers can show me that this is something that we can improve, sorry. So therefore I'm confident we will.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Moving on to Councillor Spillman.
No, I did lie, I'll be honest. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I said to Councillor Johnson, he would always be the highlight of any agenda, but he's definitely the highlight of this agenda because there's nothing else in it. That we, I mean, you know, I've brought up the issue of out of borough placements a number of times. It's so I won't go back on old ground on questions I've asked before, but I've heard officers and portfolio holders talk a good game about this temporary accommodation in the borough, so we have to stop, so we can stop placing so many people outside the borough. But when's it going to happen? And you know, where are we with plans to make that happen? Because that is the solution. You know, it's money that we could spend on other things, but it is the solution. Unfortunately, we're going to have to build that. So when's it going to happen?
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor. It's not the solution, but it is certainly a solution, I will agree. And at the moment, I believe there's 34 families that are not in Thurrock, living outside in temporary accommodation. We want to get that number down. It's always the last choice to put someone out of the borough. That's always going to be our way, but sometimes it does happen. Particular effort is being undertaken to closely monitor those number of households placed out of the borough, but rising rental costs in Thurrock, that significantly impacts upon affordability, both for the council and for the families that we're actually assisting. But we have recently purchased Brook House in Grays, which should soon be open within the next month or so, which that will give us 10 more units for temporary accommodation in the borough. I agree it's not the be-all and end-all, but it should go some way to helping us, and we'll continue to try and acquire that kind of type of property.
Councillor Roccanardi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Johnson, for your report. Perhaps you can provide more information on the Thurrock Generation Limited as a company, particularly what is the current level of achievement? And you did mention in your report that there are the strategies to provide 1,000 units. I would like to ask you how many of the 1,000 units has been developed. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for your question. I think your question probably in some way goes to asking, do we still have confidence in TRL? Well, the council does remain confident in TRL's ability to deliver sites following the delivery of St Chad's, and we're confident that TRL will deliver the 1,000 units over that 5-year period from 2018 to 2023. It has a very important role in helping to deliver sites that other developers might ignore because of perceptions about difficulties in building the sites. Lessons have to be learned. Lessons will be learned going forward. And if you heard in my presentation, we will be bringing forward a paper that gives us a proper matrix of how we decide what sites we're going to look at, who's going to be consulted on that, when they're going to be consulted on that. Once we have that, and we have that in front of us, all of us, we can then all decide what are the best sites to go for. At TRL, I still have the confidence that they will achieve the 1,000 properties within that 5-year period.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Garish.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Johnson, for your report. I'm going to take us to page 41 and the issue of the lifting of the HRA debt cap. Members will be aware that it's been nearly a year now since the government announced that they were to abolish the HRA debt cap. And from what Councillor Johnson said this evening, it's going to be beyond a year by the time this gets discussed at ONS in November and onto Cabinet, in which time we've had no spades in the ground. Does he accept that we haven't moved as fast as we should have done on this issue? And going forwards, what's his plan to make sure that we do move as quickly as possible to getting these houses developed?
Councillor Johnson.
I think I'd go as far to say we haven't moved forward as quick as we would like to have. But 500 housing units in the next 5 to 10 years, very confident that we will get those done. I've already said that, and I think this is very strong now. We have seen problems with developing of sites, access, various problems. report that I'm going to bring forward, or we're going to bring forward in November, will outline exactly, I won't say exactly, will outline how that should never happen again in the future. I would ask you to wait and see before that report comes, because I'm hopeful that it will answer an awful lot of questions and make all 49 councillors more involved and happier with the way the process is done. Not the sites maybe, but the process of how it's done. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'd just bring it to your attention that we should actually be out of time on this item, but we have got 3 more questions. I won't be taking any more after that, but I will accept these next 3 questions. So, Councillor Kieran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for your report. And I'm going to be changing my question slightly that I had thought of based on your answer to Councillor Okanade and Councillor Gerrish. So I look forward to working with you when that report comes out, because my specific focus and problem was with the consultation of TLR around the Belmont development in my own ward, and the fact that poor consultation has potentially jeopardised the 80 or so units that were there. So, but I have listened carefully to what you've said in your previous answers, and I'll take your word for it and look forward to seeing the report when it comes out and the way that this, the organisation will move forward. So.
Councillor Johnson.
I don't think there was a question as such, but I will mention Belmont Road. I mean, it is something that we have listened. Councillor Gledial mentioned in May 19 that the council is aware that residents have expressed concerns about the access issue to Belmont Road, and brought everything to a halt. We are looking into that, and we will continue to do that. Hopefully, as I said, this report will further enforce that and make that so much easier to do with all your involvement.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor Johnson. Claudian Way, Chadwell. Really exciting scheme. And as myself, my 2 ward councillors and yourself, we went round there a couple of months ago. It's really getting on. It really is going to be good, because we're going to have over 20 bungalows there, which will, in effect, give more housing to us. So it's good to see this scheme is finally coming to an end. There always are problems with schemes like this, but I think apart from the parking in Devo Parade, which has been brought to the attention of the site agent, things seem to be on track, and we're looking forward to March 2020 when the scheme is completed, and we start to get some of our older people out of the 3-bedroom houses and younger families into those homes.
Councillor Rice, do you have a question?
No, that is my comment to the...
I was looking for a question. And finally, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. Following Councillor Spillman's question earlier regarding housing families outside of our borough, you indicated that there were 34 families that are currently being housed outside of our borough. Can you emphasise, please, on what areas they are being housed, and perhaps indicate to us the furthest point away from Thurrock that one of those families could be? Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Allen, I think 34 is the correct one, correct number. I don't have the numbers of which and how many are in certain areas. As I said to Councillor Spillman, this is something that is quite often forced on us. Not all temporary accommodation families living outside of the borough are put there beyond, without their consent. Some of them actually asked to go outside of the borough. I'm not saying these 34 have, but I'm saying that is what we sometimes get. If you really need those numbers broken down, which you have asked for, I will give it to you in writing and tell you exactly where the furthest person is away from this borough, if I am allowed to legally.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Would you now like to sum up?
It's going to be a very quick summing up. I don't think I've ever given a portfolio report to such a few people before and had such few questions, but thank you very much, those who have asked. No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. We now move on to item 11, questions from members, to answer questions from members in the order in which they are submitted. We've had up to 30 minutes for this item. There are 2 questions to the leader and 8 questions to cabinet members. These can be found on page 51 to 52 of the agenda. Can I please ask members to be as brief as possible in their questions and answers to ensure that we cover as many of the questions submitted tonight. Those questions not dealt with at this meeting, the member to whom the question is addressed shall provide a written answer as soon as practical after the meeting. I would like to remind members that any supplementary question they ask must be one question that relates to the original question and not form part of a statement. I will be adhering to that. For the benefit of the recording of this meeting, I would ask those members who have submitted questions to please read out their question when asked to do so. Question 1 to the Leader of the Council. Councillor Mays, please read out your question as set out on page 51 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to crime, drugs and antisocial behaviour in Tilbury, can the portfolio holder tell me what the council is putting in place for the safety of Tilbury residents?
Councillor Glethill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Mays, for your question. As previously advised at full council and other committees, crime and drugs are a matter for the police to deal with, and specific inquiries with regards to policing matters need to be directed to them accordingly. Certain aspects of tackling antisocial behaviour do fall under my portfolio, and as such I'm going to have to give this answer in 2 parts. The Essex Police Fire and Crime Commissioner has recently increased the number of police officers in Thurrock with an additional 15 police officers, and more recently another 7 town centre police officers. This unfortunately has not included Tilbury at this time. I and this administration see tackling antisocial behaviour as a high priority and continue to work in partnership with the police to assist in any way we can. As such, the council has allocated £1 million to be spent over the next 3 years reducing antisocial behaviour. Part of this is included for the funding for the additional police officers and the funding of some specialist police operations, not at least the gang injunction, which we've seen repeated successes on, and indeed reducing the illegal use of motorcycles and quad bikes, which has seen a significant success for the police under Operation Caesar. It's also seen a reduction in Tilbury and other places of these crimes. Indeed, for the first 2 quarters across the whole of the borough, compared with the same period in the same 2 quarters in previous years, going back to 2016, we've seen a decline in reports and indeed incidences related to this. The council set up a joint partnership patrols with the council's environmental enforcement officers, and these police have been out on patrol in Tilbury. These patrols have resulted in persons being dealt with for the following crimes: causing antisocial behaviour, misuse of nitrous oxide canisters, fixed penalty notices for people committing offences such as fly tipping, littering, urinating and fly posting, breaches of care of duty and reduced to commercial waste. 3 antisocial behaviour community protection warnings have been issued, 2 fixed penalty notices for fly tipping, 4 fixed penalty notices for littering. 27% of those, 20%, that represents the 27% of the notices issued so far under this particular operation. On top of this, police have issued a number of cannabis warnings and community protection warning notices for those causing antisocial behaviour and dealing or indeed in possession of cannabis. And as I said earlier, I know this to be a fact because I've been out of them, and I understand obviously Councillor Allen's also been out on them. With the success of the police-funded town centre teams, I'll be meeting the local police commander to work with them to use part of the £1 million we've set aside for more police to put at least 2 more police officers for town centre policing in Tilbury. As soon as these discussions have concluded, I will then, of course, notify yourself, the other Tilbury councillors and indeed any other councillors of areas that will see a direct benefit from these extra police officers. Finally, and as I always say, police are intelligence and information-led organisation. So the more residents report crimes and antisocial behaviour, it clocks up the statistics, which then allows the police to argue for more services and support in specific areas. Moving on to what we've done as a council on top of the offences listed previously. We've dealt with 30 fly tipping, issued notices for 30 fly tips, 44 for littering, 6 for failing to provide waste transfer notes, I'll get that right eventually, and 13 fly posting offences, that's solely in Tilbury this year. And as part outlined in Councillor Johnson's report, we're due to complete our CCTV review and take that to overview and scrutiny, and we're recruiting an antisocial behaviour officer who will help coordinate between housing, ASB and the police to ensure a great level of support not only in Tilbury but across the borough. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Bayes, do you wish to pose a supplementary question?
Thank you for your detailed answer. I get a lot of people, obviously I know what you said about the police not being a council matter, but obviously because we put money towards it and we pay for police officers, obviously we have a vested interest. A lot of people say they don't feel safe in their own home. This is not exclusive to Tilbury, this is around Thurrock and indeed around the country as well, but obviously we need to focus on here. In Tilbury there's a neighbourhood watch scheme. They are trying really, really hard. They've seen some extra police, but there is still a very sort of lack of police presence on the ground, which is obviously making people not feel safe. In terms of the supplementary question, with youths, which is quite a big issue, especially with the C17 gang in Thurrock, what are the council doing or putting in place to ensure that youths are protected from gangs getting involved in crime, drugs and antisocial behaviour?
Councillor Dedham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Mace, for your supplementary. I regret trying to trim down my excessively long answer from earlier down to the long answer I gave, as that adds specifics in relation to the money that we've spent and the operations that we've had to help protect our young people in Tilbury. Off the top of my head, I do remember, and I know it's not here, is that we are putting extra patrols in for the environmental officers and other officers between 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening to try and engage with children to make sure that they not only are they safe and protected from those that wish to prey on them and get them into that terrible gang lifestyle, but also to try and identify what they would like to see, what they would like to do, because as someone who's not even got young children anymore, I wouldn't like to say what's best and what they would like to engage with. So let's ask the people who will be supplying that service to what they want. It is a vital role. It's prevention rather than cure. And I'd much rather that we stop people getting, children and young adults, stop them getting into crime and ruining their entire lives and staying on the straight and narrow and being a productive member of the community, which a vast number of residents of Tilbury and indeed across the borough are.
Councillor Mays, do you have a second supplementary?
Thank you for that. I know you're saying 3 till 7. I'd highly suggest increasing that onwards because the youths are out later than that, as you can imagine, and they're normally the ones that would be causing such issues. My final question will be: with the government set to announce the 20,000 extra police officers, would you, as leader of the council and portfolio holder, do all you can to get some extra police officers for Thurrock, but more so in Tilbury? Thank you.
Councillor Dedham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and again, thank you, Councillor Mays, for your question. I take on board your statements about late patrols. It certainly makes common sense. It may be different officers, and indeed, we might need to put some training towards our environmental protection officers to help them to engage where they see this, so engagement rather than enforcement. As it comes to the 20,000 police, yes, I will lobby, but I'm going to get back to what I said at the back end of the very long answer. Police numbers is intelligence and information led. So we really do need any resident and every resident who sees a crime or is a victim of crime to report it either through 101, 999 if it's emergency, or indeed Crime Stoppers, free phone which is anonymous, which they can call, leave the information, and that's passed down to the police or the relevant authority to deal with. So I know it's disheartening sometimes when it appears nothing is done. Sometimes everyone becomes aware of a problem, it goes on for weeks and weeks, months and months and months, and then suddenly something happens, but where it appears nothing is happening, it's a bit of a problem. So the more people in that time report problems, the easier it's going to be to say we need to allocate more resources to it.
Thank you, Councillor Goodall. We now move on to question 2 to the leader. Councillor Pothecary, please read out your question as set out on page 51 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can the portfolio holder explain why the recent announcement of town centre policing teams did not include Tilbury?
Councillor Goodall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Pothecary. As with my previous answer, the police establishment allocations resources are a matter for Essex Police. However, I can advise that town centre police have been allocated to areas where they meet the criteria of a town centre as laid down by the PFCC. We had no input in that, and this was a county-wide made decision to accommodate for the police. As lead and portfolio holder for ASB, I recognise the need for increased presence in other areas of the borough not receiving town centre policing, including Tilbury, and I've already raised my concerns with the police. I have advised them that Tilbury should be an area of priority of focus, and I outlined this in response to Councillor Mays earlier, and indeed to Councillor Allen about 6 or 8 weeks ago. I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong, when they raised that particular issue with me direct. But as I said, we're looking to use one part of the £1 million that we've set aside for extra police numbers to do this, and as soon as we've had these discussions and now concluded, I will of course notify the councillors for Tilbury, other councillors in areas that may be direct benefit, and indeed the entire chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Pothecary. Do you have a excuse me, Pothecary, do you have a second?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry, I'm not going to do the supplementary that I planned because I'm slightly taken aback by something that you said in your answer, Councillor Gledhill, which was that there was no consultation with the council by the Essex Police about where these officers would go in terms of being town centre teams. Could you just clarify what the relationship between Essex Police and the council, the state it's in at the moment, if that didn't occur?
Councillor Gledhill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was actually going to call for a point of clarification at that point. I did not say there wasn't consultation with Thurrock. I said there wasn't consultation with us in the definition of a town centre, as this was something across the whole of Essex that they decide. We must remember, and as I said right at the beginning, the police are a separate organisation. It's down to the PFCC to make those choices. And whilst this is a terrible thing to say for any council, especially the leader, there are times when it's not just all about Thurrock. And unfortunately for the PFCC, he doesn't always just think about Thurrock. He has to think about the whole of Essex, and this was one of those occasions. We may not agree with the methodology that he used. We may not agree with the numbers that he used, but equally we've got to remember we have wall boundaries, so we could say Tilbury consists of Tilbury Riverside and Tilbury St Chad's, but actually it may include parts of the Rectory, parts of Chadwell. We don't know. They work on a completely different set of criteria, and obviously when they're setting their rules, it is down to them. But we have registered our disdain for the fact that we weren't given police officers from one of the areas which quite clearly does need extra policing, and I will continue that vein. And it's not just Tilbury, there are other areas in Thurrock where I'm saying equally.
Councillor Pothecary, do you wish to pose a second supplementary?
Thank you for the clarification, Councillor Gledhill. By what kind of rate do you see the teams reducing crime by, and by when do you feel we'll start to see those results?
I really hate saying this. These type of matters are something for the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner to give. The Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner does attend here in January, and I'm sure he will be able to give you all that information. These are police operations. I do not know whether these police will be pounding the beat as we used to in the olden days, or whether they're going to be put onto specialist operations that will target one particular crime or another particular crime. There is a report going to Cleaner, Greener, Safer Overview Scrutiny Committee, which outlines the unfortunate increase in crime, not just in Thurrock, but across Essex and indeed the entire country. Reported crimes across Essex and across the whole of the country. And of course, the relevant chair of Overview and Scrutiny could, of course, ask the police spokesman at that point for clarification.
Thank you, Councillor Gedden. We now move on to questions submitted to the Cabinet members. Question 1, Councillor Lydiard, please read out your question and set out on page 51 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder please explain why, as a councillor visiting my residence, I have been refused a parking permit for Thurrock?
Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Lydiard, for your question. It might help, Mr. Mayor, if I explained that parking permits form part of the traffic regulation order pertaining to any given scheme. And in the case of the Tilbury resident parking zones, the traffic regulation order doesn't make provision for councillors' permits. So put simply, that's why you've not been issued with a permit. As I'm sure that Councillor Lydiard will appreciate, and any member will appreciate, when the council receives a request for a permit, it has to apply strict eligibility criteria. And at the time of your request, unfortunately, you didn't meet that criteria. But going on from that, Mr. Mayor, it might help if I reminded Councillor Lydiard that if he is attending a pre-arranged visit with a resident in one of the PPAs, he can, of course, benefit from the visitors' parking permits which they're issued with. And I will go a bit further and say that there are other options. The council is currently looking at the situation as part of the fees and charges review, and I'm currently considering an option which will allow councillors to be issued with visitors' permits. There are a number of considerations that have to be taken into account before that a final decision is made on that, but as I say, I'm considering that and would be happy to report back in due course. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manning. Councillor Lydiard, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Councillor. And Mr. Mayor, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to question 2. Councillor Mays, please read out your question and set out on page 51 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder tell me what is being done about the strong toast-like smell that is a daily nuisance for the residents of Thurrock Park?
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for your question here. The Council are fully aware of this issue. We have had concerns raised from members, residents, shall I say, previously, and I would like to say that we are taking this matter seriously. The Council are aware as to where this toast-like smell is likely coming from, and they are proactively engaging with the company to find a resolution, and I will not be naming the company this evening. The work has been ongoing for some time now as well, dating back to October last year, and I'd like to add as well that since October, when they've had their first visit, there have been subsequent visits as well in 2018 and in 2019 so far. The company have conducted their own work as well, having employed an odour specialist, and so far the evidence would not allow for a statutory odour nuisance, so it's a bit technical this one, but we're exploring what options are available to the council, and we'll continue to work with the company and keep visiting the site equally. One request I do have, which is very helpful for the Tilbury councillors here this evening, and I believe some residents as well, is that we are asking the residents, as the residents have already put in a concern, and our officers are doing equally the same, is to keep an odour diary. So it sounds a bit silly, but when you're going outside, have a sniff. If you smell the toast smell, jot it down, keep a diary. I mean, can you let the council know? Because then we can build up a case as well, which is what we're currently doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Councillor Mays, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that. It has been going on for a while, as you said. The only thing that I would say is there always seems to be quite an onus on residents. The residents have to report. And I get that, but when people keep reporting, they lose faith. It's the same as police and everything and that sort of thing. Have we got a time scale of how long this is likely to go? Because obviously it's been going on for a while now, and if you're at these stages, have you got, I'm not saying that I'm going to hold you to its exact date, but have you got a rough time scale of when you would expect to have a resolution?
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for your supplementary. Currently, no, there is no time scales I'd be willing to give right now. It's a bit like the police. It does rely on evidence, and hence why we're asking for residents to give that evidence to the council so then they can do the work they need to do behind the scenes. Just like to add as well that obviously touching on the point about it's always coming from the residents. In this case in particular, the officers on site have visited it multiple times, and any of the officers we have across the council who happen to be in Tilbury as well are also just, it sounds a bit weird, but having a sniff in the area to see if it's there and then reporting it back to the council. And equally, as I've alluded to as well, the council's team have been actively engaging with the company which they believe this smell is coming from, and actively engaging with them to try and reduce the smell.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Do you have a second? Thank you. We now move on to question 3. Councillor Fletcher, please read out your question. Oh, I'm sorry, he's not here. Move on to question 4 then. Councillor Anderson, please read out your question as set out on page 51 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the Cabinet Member update the Chamber as to the effectiveness of our youth offending service?
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Anderson, for your question. Our youth offending service, which helps to ensure that young people who become in trouble with the law have their lives turned around, is incredibly effective. The national reoffending figures for England stand at about 41% for the last year. For the South East, it's slightly lower at 38.4%. For Essex, lower still at 32.8%. But in Thurrock, our reoffending rate is only 29.5%. So all in all, if you are a young person who enters statutory services in the borough of Thurrock, it's far more likely will help you turn your life around and ensure that you don't reoffend again, helping to change lives and making sure our communities are safer.
Councillor Anderson, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the Cabinet Member assure me that the service is both well funded and well supported?
Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for an insightful question, Councillor Anderson. Unfortunately, the youth offending service at one stage did have a slight cut. In fact, it had half of its staff sacked in 2011-2012 under the previous Labour administration, the previous leader of the council, and much like a butcher who doesn't quite know what he's doing, the cuts were just random and violent. But fortunately, under this Conservative administration, at the direction of the leader of the council and myself, additional posts have been created to support officers to deal with gang-related issues. New posts have been put in place, jointly funded by the council and the CCG, and the council and the National Probation Service, to additionally help young people turn their lives around. And thanks to this, the youth offending service has got greater capacity today and has got more positive outcomes today than it had when we took office 3.5 years ago.
Councillor Anderson, do you wish to pose a second supplement? We now go on to question 5. Councillor Akinbowen, please read out your question as set out on page 52 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Residents in Mayflower, Russia, for 100 area have complained about parking due to the numbers of cars which collect or offload school children at 2 schools. Can you look into the possibilities of parking controls to alleviate problems for residents?
Councillor Manning.
Oh, sorry, we have life. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Akinbowen, for your question. The first thing I would say is that it is recognised that there was a particular problem in Mayflower Road with parking during the school pick-up and drop-off time. You ask whether additional parking controls can be put in place. I would say that there are already extensive waiting restrictions in Mayflower Road. Having looked at them, it's my view, and it's the council's view too, that, or officers' view, that it's hard to see how they could be extended without adversely impacting upon residents in the road also. Obviously, we are of course open to any ideas that you have, and we'll gladly receive them. But as I say, there are extensive waiting restrictions in the road already. The council's civil enforcement officers carry out regular patrols. They have been very proactive in doing that, but it has been agreed that we'll step up the activity in Mayflower Road. there is a caveat to that. We have a very small team of officers, and of course, you know, the problems in Mayflower Road are not limited just to the schools there. It is a problem across the borough, and I say that as a councillor who has a particular problem in my ward as well. So we will carry out enforcement activity. We'll step that up, but as I say, that's limited too. There are other options. I don't want to go into them too much because they are at a very early stage, but I think we're looking, you know, there is potentially the option for physical changes to the road layout. There are two options which I know officers are looking at. Both of them would have quite considerable cost implications, but as I say, work is underway to explore those. I can't say whether they will come to fruition in the near future, but I hope that gives you some reassurance nonetheless that we are looking at a wide range of options. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ackenbone, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The residents of Mayflower Road really don't want vague answer. We just want something that is more specific. If we can have some resident bay on that road, that is what they are actually asking for.
Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm not sure the council has received any requests for parking bays specifically for residents' use, but you know, obviously you have had that feedback from residents, so I'm sure that's something we can look at. Again, it's an option, but there is the question of enforcement as well. I mean, you know, I'm an optimist, but I think, to be honest, without additional enforcement, those parking bays will very quickly be used by parents who want to park there for a few minutes to drop off their children. As I say, I think it is the prevailing view that some kind of physical alteration to the road network would be a more lasting solution. Mayflower Road was never designed originally to be the road from which two schools would be accessed by. In fact, the schools weren't due to be there at all. It's another example of poor planning. As I say, happy to look at any ideas. The council is open to any solution. The one point I have to make, though, is that, you know, the council has recently announced its Safer Routes to School policy. Schools have a part to play in that. Those schools which have a travel plan will be prioritised. There are, I think, 10 schemes which have been prioritised for implementation this year. So I say to any ward councillor who's in communication with their schools, give them a nudge if they want something in return, because very often the schools are the ones who receive a lot of the complaints. It would help their case greatly, and the residents who live in harmony with them if they would bring forward a school travel plan, and I say that will help them, help their particular scheme for their area be prioritised. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ackenbone, do you have a second supplementary?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We now move on to question 6. Councillor Jeffries, please read out the question as set out on page 52 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder for health please update members on what representations the council has received from the medical profession on the proposed changes to healthcare, in particular with regards to Alsett Hospital?
Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Jeffries, for your question. As I've told the Chamber in the past, in May 2017, we signed a memorandum of understanding with our health partners outlining that the construction of our integrated medical centre network will be predicated on Alsett Hospital only changing or closing when the new centres were up and running, so all services remain in the borough of Thurrock to be enhanced by being co-located with GPs, mental health services and public health services. That MOU has been adhered to. In due course, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the People's Panel that was established will see a matrix of services that will outline each and every service from Alsett Hospital, where those services will be redeployed within the new network, as at the same time we roll out additional assurances regarding GP contracts for those facilities and our initial draft plans for how mental health services will be integrated across the 4 medical centres. Across the 4 individual sites, members would have already seen that the Purfleet IMC is clearly outlined in the Purfleet Regeneration Master Plan. The Tilbury Regeneration Plan that Councillor Coxall brought forward clearly has the IMC in there. The Corringham IMC has already had planning permission passed, and I attended a visit at the Community Hospital a fortnight ago with the Director of Health to see progress. The matrix will come soon, and funding is now in a very sound position. Overview and Scrutiny did call in this decision to the Secretary of State, which meant the decision was put on pause. It was very regrettable that the decision regarding our IMC as an alternate hospital was published in June 2018, and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee took almost half a year to get around to calling it in. That's cost us about 14 months of progress when you consider all the partners we've had to re-corral. But we are now pushing on. The independent review panel has come back, they've judged the clinical merits of the case and are confident that this is within the best interest of patients. I know that this scheme is still opposed by the Labour group, but let's just quickly review the groups that are in favour of it. NELF, the community health provider arm of the NHS, EPUT, the mental health provider arm of the NHS, so the Secretary of State for Health, NHS England, the Clinical Senate, Basildon Hospital, Thurrock Public Health, Thurrock Social Care, Thurrock CCG, Basildon CCG, Rochford CCG, Southend CCG, Mid-Essex CCG, basically the entire medical profession with the exception of the Labour Party.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jeffrey, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to question 7. Councillor Gerrish, please read out your question as set out on page 52 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What action is Thurrock Council taking to minimise the impact of additional traffic from Purfleet's new secondary school?
Councillor Manny, would you please respond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Gerrish. Thank you, Councillor Gerrish, for your question. I think the first thing I would say, Mr. Mayor, is it's worth noting that the school only opened this month. So I think in terms of any additional traffic or traffic-associated problems or parking problems, I think the full impact of that will become evident in the fullness of time, although I hope that the measures that are already in place will mitigate against that. Again, another point I want to make before moving on is that it's not necessarily the council's responsibility to implement all the measures aimed at addressing additional traffic problems. It actually rests with the developer. And I'll come back to a point I made earlier about the planning process. It's a bit late to look at measures when something like a secondary school is already in operation. Of course, there are things that the council can look at, but fundamentally, it's at the planning stage. It's about holding the developer to account and making sure that the conditions are in the planning consent. So turning to the planning consent, I mean, I'm sure Councillor Gerrish has read that, as no doubt a number of us have. I've picked out some of the measures that are already in place and which have come about because of the Council Highway Department's recommendation to the Planning Committee and their contribution to the planning process. The developer is required to make a £20,000 contribution to the Council so as to enable to amendments to the existing parking controls in London Road. There will be a new signalised pedestrian crossing in London Road which will serve the Academy. A private bus service should be in place to allow transport of pupils between the Harris Academy site in Shafford 100 and the new campus in London Road. There will be a student drop-off and pick-up facility at Cornwall House car park, which is but just 500 yards from the school. And there are also provision for on-site parking and a coach drop-off and pick-up facility. Again, I come back to the issue of a travel plan. The Academy is also expected to prepare and maintain a travel plan which will encourage walking, cycling and the use of public transport. And on that point, of course, it's worth pointing out that the school does sit on a bus route and is only metres away from Purfleet train station. So it is hoped that more pupils will use public transport given that they have access to these kind of services. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manny. Councillor Gerrish, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do. And I'll thank the portfolio holder for the answer. Clearly, we all welcome the fact that the new school is opening in Purfleet, and it does give us huge opportunities in the area. But obviously, we do have to make sure that we consider the traffic issues around that and making sure that the public are safe. I certainly welcome the fact that there is the new pedestrian crossing coming. I think this is something that we've talked a lot about in Purfleet. And actually, if you go down London Road in either direction from the site of the school, you have to go quite a long way before you actually get to a crossing. Would the portfolio holder be able to confirm for us, please, is when we would expect that new crossing to open?
Councillor Manny.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would dearly love to, but unfortunately I can't. That is a planning condition, and I think I'm right in saying my reading of that is that it should have been in situ before the school opened. Now, I do know that officers in the highways team have been very active in reminding the developer of their obligation. They haven't as yet been forthcoming in fulfilling that obligation, but I understand that they now understand the urgency of it. Unfortunately, permits need to be issued before such work can be carried out, and there is inevitably going to be some delay because until they do apply, those permits can't be issued. So I think I'm right in saying again that we're probably looking at some time in October, but ultimately, if the developer doesn't meet this obligation or any of their obligations, it does fall to the planning department to consider enforcement action. I do say that again as someone who represents a ward in which a school is in flagrant breach of a planning condition, and there's a tendency to believe, well, because it's a school, we won't hold them to it. I personally expect, whether it's a school, a charitable organisation, a large corporation, a large business, if they have sought planning consent, they've obtained planning consent with conditions, they should adhere to it, and enforcement action should follow come what may. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Malik. Councillor Gerrish, do you have a final supplementary?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So can the portfolio holder just clarify? He seems to be speaking as though he's expecting the school themselves to build the crossing, whereas I think most of us would have expected they'd provide the funding to the council in order to be able to deliver a project to put a crossing in place. Could you just confirm the situation, please?
Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, that's not my understanding, and if I'm wrong, I will stand corrected. But my understanding is that the developer is responsible for ensuring that the crossing is put in place, and they will use a contractor for that purpose. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manning. I've let this section overrun slightly. It's gone on. The last question, question 8, looks like it could be quite a technical answer. Are you happy for that to be responded to in writing?
I will take a written answer, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gerrish. Moving on to item 12, reports from members representing the council on outside bodies. Councillor Kieran, I understand you would like to present a report on Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education. Members, please note this report has been tabled this evening, and I believe there is a copy in front of me. Councillor Kieran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's very nice to be able to stand up here with this report, and I've been on the committee since I was first elected here, and it's in front of you, so you can all go through it at your leisure, so I won't take up too much time with people. But the main reason I want to stand up and speak on it is because we're very lucky that the chair of the committee, Reverend John Guest, is actually here with us, and so I really just want to place on record the thanks of the committee to him for the sterling, passionate and enthusiastic job he does every time he chairs the meetings, and also, you know, prior to it and post as well, and also the teachers who are on the committee and the members of the community who represent the various faith groups. The report is very well set out and puts, you know, very well sort of clear for people to be able to see what's going on. The one thing I really want to comment on, which has been excellent, is seeing the development of Youth Sacre, which has involved actually young people from our schools coming here to the committee room and telling us about what their experience is in school, and giving us advice on how we could help strengthen the provision of religious education within Thurrock. So it's an absolute pleasure to be on there. I'm more than happy sort of after the meeting or whatever to take sort of questions on it, but really please back the committee, show an interest in it, and let's be glad we've got people like our chair and other members of the community who serve on it. It's a real benefit for Thurrock, and it's a real good tool for community cohesion, and it's, you know, well worth the time put into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kieran, for your report, and it was good to hear. Does any other member who represents the council and outside bodies wish to present a report? Thank you. Moving on to item 13, minutes of committees. These are listed on the agenda contents page. Does any member wish to speak? Item 14, motions update report. The next item can be found on page 53 to 58 of the agenda and is in an information report on the status of motions resolved at council. Does any member wish to speak? We have one motion has been submitted for debate this evening. Motion 1. Right, Councillor Jeffries, do you wish to propose and then speak to your motion as printed on page 59 of the agenda?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to take the amendment and for the motion to be redrafted as per Councillor Pothecary.
Right, so I'd like to then present the amended motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I wish to make it clear from the outset that the motion is not an attack on the showman community that live in South Ockenden. In fact, I meet regularly with members of the showman community who raise their concerns about Buckles Lane. I submitted the original motion some 6 weeks ago before the deadline, and it was only on the closing day for motions that I was informed that it would not be accepted on the grounds that it was critical of officers. I was advised that if I changed the words senior officers to council, it would be permitted. I agreed to this change so that we may be able to debate this important issue. Many of you in this chamber have been here longer than me, and some of you have been in previous administrations and attempted to solve the problems of Buckles Lane. This is why I believe my original motion asking for officers to bring forward a detailed plan of action was more appropriate. However, I reluctantly agreed, as I said, to the rewording of the motion. I, along with the showman community and others in Ockenden, are very concerned for the safety of the people who are renting caravans from landowners in Buckles Lane, completely unaware that their home is unregulated. In fact, on a regular basis, the electricity trips because it's not able to cope with the demand, and the roads regularly flood because areas of the greenbelt have been cleared, filled with hardcore, and caravans placed on them. The water pressure is so low that when the fire brigade attended a recent fire, there was serious concern that if the fire spread to caravans, they would not be able to tackle the fire properly. If anyone's visited Buckles Lane, they'll see that the caravans are packed so closely to each other that should there be a fire in one, it would quickly spread to others. And I, along with others, fear a considerable loss of life should there be a fire. Another concern is that the welfare of children that might be living in these caravans. We're all corporate parents and have a responsibility to every child in Thurrock, regardless of where they live. And at the moment, we don't know if there are any children that may need support from Children's Services Department, and there may well be other vulnerable adults that need the help that the council could provide. So this is why I've brought this motion to the council, not to attack the travelling community, but to try and get officers to take the necessary action that will either clear the land of the caravans or make them a legitimate caravan park and then enforce all the rules and regulations that such a site needs. Therefore, I request you to support this motion.
Is the motion seconded? Thank you, Councillor Pothecary. Would you like to speak now or reserve your right to speak until at the end of the debate?
I'll speak now, please, Mr Mayor. I'm just going to speak really, really briefly. Obviously support all efforts that are made to enforce planning decisions and stop violations, especially where the health and safety of those people living on those sites is at risk. I'm happy to support Councillor Jeffries' motion and obviously extend its sentiments to all other places in the borough where violations are occurring and putting our communities at risk. I would urge you to support.
Does any other member wish to speak? Councillor Spillman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I read your
press release regarding this with some interest. I'm just, I mean, from my perspective, you've been, I mean, the Conservative group have been in control of this council since 2016, and nothing has been done effectively to deal with this problem. And now it seems to be that you're suggesting that you're trying to get things done, but you're facing a roadblock from officers at the council. I mean, that's what your article said, and that's what your initial motion suggested. So, I mean, I'd like some clarity. You know, is there? Are you facing? You know, a refusal from officers to deal with this situation, or not?
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I, as a ward councillor for Bellis, support this motion because something has got to be done in this area which we know is Buckles Lane. For far too long, it seems Buckles Lane and the residents that live there have gone unchecked, unregulated. This area is expanding at a vast rate. We do not know who or how many people are actually living there. I visited this place myself and I've gone down there and it was frightening. I feel this is gradually becoming a separate village and not part of the local community. Many more caravans have appeared on the area and are sited so close to each other as to make it very unsafe and could be a fire hazard. I feel this is a disaster waiting to happen. Thurrock Council must not seem to be negligent in this matter. We have a duty of care to protect the community that live there and the environment. Showmen have lived in this site for many years, which they like to be known as, not travellers. They are law-abiding and are hard-working people who contribute to the local community. I feel these people also need support as to regulate this area as to ensure their well-being. It is not good enough as to continually turn a blind eye as to the events that are happening in this area and not implementing planning laws which other residents of Thurrock have to adhere to. So I really look forward to reading a detailed report and seeing action taking place. And I also ask for other members to support this motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Gledhill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Not only do I welcome the motion, also thank the leader of the Labour group for a sensible amendments in wording to put this forward. I've been a councillor here for the best part of 14 years, and the issue of Buckles Lane has been one of those that has been ongoing. As all of us, well, some of us may remember, the Development Corporation put a 10-year hiatus on taking action against anybody on the site. And that's not to say that we as a local authority, irrespective of political party in charge, should have stopped monitoring the site and ensuring that works were there were safe. It's really good to see that no one's here to try and score political points. We all seem to be in agreement, and then rather than pointing the finger, we're trying to make sure our residents are protected, irrespective of what community they come from. But it's not only this site, there's other tolerated sites across the borough where this is happening. So the faster we can get this resolved, the faster we can get this resolved once and for all across the whole of the borough. As has already been reported in the press, a number of injunctions have been issued over the past few years to stop smaller portions of the site being expanded. Planning inquiry notices were sent for information to start other action, but with the site being so complex and large, the information has not been sufficient to stop those clearly determined to basically develop parts of the green belt and other land without permission from steamrolling through with their plans, many just to make money. Since Councillor Jeffrey's comments and inquiries about 6 weeks ago, I'm pleased to say that discussions with the Cabinet member, with officers and myself have taken place, and this has led to a cross-departmental, multi-agency task force started to be formed to tackle the issue as a whole. This isn't something that Thurrock Council should be responsible for to deal with on its own. And equally, it should not fall on the planning department to be doing all the work in it. I'm also pleased to inform the Chamber this evening that the officer who helped compile the very complex case for the injunction against unauthorised encampments within the borough is likely and is most likely to take a vital role in the council's contribution to this task force as we go forward. I don't want to give the impression that there is no need for this report. I think this report is vital to the way we move forward and we move forward as a whole. This is not just a planning issue. This is not just the travelling showman community that are being put at risk. It's everybody on this site. I understand so far from officers that in excess of 1,000 hours have already been dedicated to the issue, and I'm sure 1,000 more hours will be done before the task force bring this issue to a close. And those who are legitimately there and protected are done so, are safe, and finally have the permission that have been requesting, many of them, for decades. It was mentioned by Councillor Jeffries that should the outcome be that this becomes a tolerated caravan site, I'm going to need to make really clear to all members that this would have to form part of the local plan, so it would need to be moved forward and agreed as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the lack of a 5-year supply of pitches as part of this plan is being used as a whipping stick against this local authority, allowing those that unlawfully set up on land that they own just to put building and development in the green belt. So hopefully by bringing this whole issue to an end, using this report, taking forward the local plan and getting it agreed, we'll be able to bring this, not only the issue at Buckles Lane to an end, but issues right across the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kedwell. Councillor Gerrish.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I will keep this brief. I just wanted to expand slightly on a point that Councillor Spillman made. And I wonder if in his summing up, Councillor Jeffries could just explain to us what action it is that this motion will enable, and while I do obviously support it and any action against planning infringement across the borough, but could he explain what action this motion will enable that the administration couldn't have undertaken in any case? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gerrish. Councillor Jeffries, do you wish to sum up?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll keep it brief. Basically, what I found was it's not just a planning issue. It is more than that. And I think, in fairness, planning officers are starting to put enforcement notices in and stop further caravans from going on there. But the site is so full of caravans, it's gone beyond that now. And what I hope this motion will do is to air it publicly, so that as a chamber we can give clear call to say that we want to see action taken, so that the vulnerable people that possibly live down there are protected, so that fire regulations are brought into place, and as Councillor Gethill said, if it is made a permanent caravan site, then all the regulations that's involved will be put in place, and people will be safer.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. We will now move to the vote on the agreed amended motion. All... Thank you. I had 4 pages of notes to get to that stage. Thank you. We now come to the close of the meeting. Just for members and their guests, there is still some buffet left in the members' lounge. So please come and join me after the meeting if you want. So I now formally close the meeting. So that concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and I now declare the meeting closed. Can I remind members to leave their white cards behind, unless you'd like to give me £10 now? You could give me £10 anyway.